Michele Bachmann is a Republican candidate for President of the United States. I have publicly said that she would be the one that I would vote for. It was between her and Rick Santorum in the end, and I picked Michele Bachmann. It was a tough choice, but I believe both of them. But Michele, I think, has the tools that are required today to be the President of the United States, and I think she understands what we're facing and the trouble that we're facing. Welcome, Michele Bachmann. How are you?
I'm doing great, Glenn. Good to talk to you this afternoon.
Okay, so let's start here. Let me go back to, did you hear the monologue that I just did, or were you listening in the studio or able to?
Yes, I did, on preparation.
Okay, so on preparation, but also what's coming, you know, what they're talking about over in Europe. They're talking now about if this thing breaks apart, they're going to have to lock the states down. The UK is saying that they're trying to figure out a way that they'll be able to get English citizens out of Europe and back home in case there is a collapse of this system. I mean, that sounds pretty dire. How come we're not getting any warnings from the political class to the average American prepare for very difficult times?
Well, you're exactly right. We're hearing more about the Kim Kardashian wedding than we are about economic and societal collapse. And I think that right now there's a general consensus, Glenn, that there will be a collapse of the EU. And I had asked some people that I knew about exposure of United States banks to the European meltdown of the sovereign debt crisis. Some estimates are we have exposure of $50 to $60 billion, which wouldn't have a devastating impact in the United States. It'd have some, but it wouldn't be devastating. But it really is for American companies overseas, because they would no longer have access to credit. And I think especially for companies that have those interests, that's where we'd see the real ramifications, as opposed to the United States banks.
You also wouldn't have the sales to, you know, how many states are
That's right.
I mean, really impacted. I think Texas is maybe number one. The number one state that sells things to Europe. I mean, that's a gigantic impact on the individual states. And Michele, I mean, they all said this. You were there during TARP. You were one of the first people that stood up against TARP. They told you at the time, if one of us fall, we all fall. It's lights out, right?
Well, I opposed it behind closed doors because President Bush sent over Hank Paulson, who I thought was not a good messenger. He was the former president of Goldman Sachs. He was unable to make the case why the American Congress should give, for the first time in the history of man, a $700 billion blank check to one individual. No strings attached, no conditions, no right of court review, and he could spend it in any way he wanted to. He didn't even spend it according to the way that he told us he planned to. And, of course, we saw what the Federal Reserve did in the meantime, and it laid the foundation for the automobile bailouts, it laid the foundation for the mortgage bailouts, and it laid the foundation for the $1 trillion stimulus as well. You'd mentioned Texas and Texas exposure for businesses. What we may see, Glenn, in the EU with collapse would be the recessionary impact on the United States. Undoubtedly, the United States would likely move into a recession that has potential of being quite severe if we see a sovereign debt crisis. But that's really up to Europe. If Europe makes the decision not to deal with getting their financial house in order, they aren't indicating that they will, we have to prepare. We have to prepare that they may fail, and in that case, we have to limit our exposure in the United States. Under no circumstances should we bail them out. Well,
we're going to. We're going to do it through the IMF. I mean, we're what are we, 26 or 17% of the IMF? We're going to bail out Europe. We're going to do it, Michele.
Well, I wouldn't, as President of the United States, either through the World Bank or through the IMF, I would not put taxpayer exposure, U.S. tax exposure, at risk. We've got to pull that back. But you're right. That's where the Obama administration is at right now. That's what's wrong. And again, there's calls for even more money from the U.S. More money? Where are we going to get this money? We don't have it. We're already in hock.
We have a situation with the Fed where, and I don't remember the exact numbers, you may know them or not, I don't know, but we've always had like a 7-day policy where we'll exchange euros for dollars through the Fed for 7 days. We'll swap them out for 7 days just to make transactions easier for other countries. We've now elongated that to, what is it, 30 days? Tiffany, do you know? 60 days? I can't remember what it was, but a very long period of time. So now we're taking euros in, and we're giving them U.S. dollars. Well, why would we in our wildest dreams do that at this point? Why would we do that?
Well, at the worst possible time, we're doing that. And I think what we're seeing is nations all across the globe, including the United States, for the first time ever, we're making decisions that a banana republic would make, not decisions that a first world nation would make. So the scenario that we're looking at is collapse of nation after nation after nation, and historically strong nations. Now, China isn't making decisions like this. Even Russia isn't foolish enough to make some decisions like this. Not that they're completely well-run nations, but we're making decisions like this. We shouldn't.
The West,
because when our
it's the West.
It's the West
that is doing it.
It's the West.
That's right. And isn't that interesting that we have people that are trying to collapse the West, and yet our banks and everybody else, our politicians, are all working together, hand in hand, to also collapse the West. They won't claim they're doing that, but that's what they're doing. They're collapsing the West. And the Eastern and Middle Eastern regions are not doing these mistakes. They're not going this direction. What is it with the West all of a sudden?
Well, and if you look at where is the money right now, the money is in the hands of the Chinese Politburo, the Russian billionaires, and the Saudi Arabian sheiks. That's where all the money is. And yet the United States continues to act like we're a wealthy nation, a creditor nation. We're not. We're a debtor nation. We're broke. And yet we continue to act like we're still on top of the world, like we're in some economic fantasy. And I think that's why it's important that people know we're in a situation where we can be looking at collapse in the EU. We're looking at an hour-by-hour change in the Middle East of historic proportions, and it's important that people take what should be considered even common sense precautions.